Whenever we talk about Thomas and Friends, we tend to mostly talk about the classic era of the show. Those first 7 seasons of the show are what we mostly reflect on. Even the Brenner era of the show has some fantastic things going for it. But then there are the other eras of the show that we tend to forget and or despise more than you expect. And one of those eras is the HiT era of the show. This run of Thomas is called the HiT era because Thomas was owned by HiT Entertainment and they made changes to the show to appeal to a younger demographic. The HiT era of Thomas and Friends is an era of the show that is looked down upon by fans, even back in the 2000s when it came out. I honestly can't really blame them though. HiT Entertainment changed so much of the show after the buyout in 2002. We saw a glimpse of that change in season 7 with how it was made and the outcome of that season in terms of its writing. This was a video I was kind of afraid to make, since not only are we covering a batch of seasons that generally can be described all together, but also because it is an era of the show that I am heavily nostalgic for. I remember putting in DVDs for season 8 and 9 into my DVD player, watching episodes like Fish, James Gets a New Coat, and Flower Power all the time. But nostalgia is something that I don't want to cloud my judgment when I am looking at this show, because if it did, then all the nitrogen seasons would rank highly, and that's the last thing we need. Just like with the classic era video, I will be covering the entire HiT era of the show. I will also be going into the HiT era Bible that shows us what the process behind the characters and their writing were. Just to let y'all know, I'll be using the US dubs of this era since it is the dub that I am most touched with, and I will not be covering the specials in this video. I am saving them for a future video. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. Before we get into the main thing about this show, we have to go over the Bible of the era of the show, which we were given a few years ago. I have gone over a bit of this Bible in the James video, going over James's section in the Bible and what I thought about it, but I think talking about this era of the show makes this Bible rather important, and it shows all that this era has to offer. The Bible was written by Abby Grant, who was brought onto the series in 2001 when they were working on season 6. She was tasked with writing this Bible for new writers coming onto the show, outlining characters, locations, etc. This was done to have consistency with the episodes, since I would say the inconsistent writing of the last 2 classic seasons were somewhat of a low point of that era, and for the new writing style to be the norm going forward at the time. The Bible was finished in March 2003. Now, as a guide, I do think it is pretty helpful, but I do think that this Bible seems to not understand those characters more than anything. There are so many things in this Bible about the characters that make no sense to me. I'm going to go in order of the Bible for these characters to give you an idea. Percy is vulnerable, suggestible, and open to teasing. This is just the wrong way to describe Percy. He is someone who is cheeky like Thomas, but when he feels mistreated, he becomes vengeful and hot-tempered. What makes this line make even less sense is that it is suggested through some wording that this Bible was written when season 6 was new, and Percy was anything but suggestible in that season. Another one is, in the past, Toby's appearance has been cause for comment/teasing, which has created opportunities for an important Thomas and Friends rule to be retired. Looks are not as important as what's inside, and the most important thing for an engine is to try your hardest, and Toby tries harder than most. Toby never had a problem with his appearance in the show before. Whenever someone did make fun of his appearance, he just wouldn't give a flying fuck about it. So seeing him be self-conscious because of how he looks is just so wrong. Henry is a warrior, an engine hypochondriac who has to burn special coal. This one, I just can't. This one's just no. Just no. Because these are things I would use to describe Henry in season 1, not season 8. Since he has worried about the rain, ruining his paintwork, and he did not need special coal, but then got that problem fixed literally an episode later in that season. So seeing him being reverted back is a retcon that is beyond wrong in many ways. Even though Henry didn't get a lot in season 6 and 7, he wasn't this pathetic engine that the Bible is describing him, which just makes his character bio, so much more interesting to read about. Another thing this Bible shows is that it was apparently always the plan to phase out engine crew in the show. This section explains that the engine drivers being in the stories is optional now, which is something I can somewhat get. If the drivers are integral to the story, then the characters have a lot more options open to them, but doing this also removes one of the core appeals of Thomas that I and many fans also really like, which was the realism. So phasing out the drivers means that we are losing a bit of that edge. Then there are some other major things in this Bible that describes the writing style of the series moving forward. There are sections on education curriculum, the format of the show, when it would air on TV, a writing style guide, and age-appropriate language. It overall shows that this more dumbed-down Thomas was always the plan, and it was something that the Reverend Wilbur Audrey disapproved of, which makes this Bible more hated than ever, though I could be wrong about that. I didn't want to go super in-depth on this Bible, since there are some videos out there that go into it, but I did link the Bible in the description of the video, since I think it is an interesting piece of Thomas's history and a look into how writers' guides are structured and made. Now then, let's get to the main act of this video, the 5 seasons, starting with Season 8.
It was a busy, bustling day on the island of Sodor. All over the island, steam engines and diesel engines were happily working together.
Season 8 is considered the best season of the HiT era, which is an opinion I never really thought about much till I rewatched the season, and after watching it, I can see why people would consider this one of the better seasons of the HiT era, but I don't really think this season is all that good, so let's just jump into the season. The first thing about this season that needs to be talked about is the presentation of the season overall. One thing about these HiT era seasons, specifically seasons 8 through 11, is that the frame rate for the show has increased. Classic era Thomas would shoot the episodes at a high frame rate and then slow them down in post to make the engines look and feel more realistic, aka shots like these. In these HiT seasons, it just feels like they shot the episodes and then just left it as it is, which comes off as cheap more than anything. There is also the fact that the rest of the model episodes will be shot on digital camera compared to the film reel that the classic episodes would be shot with. All that really matters in terms of the presentation for this era is the resolution for seasons 8 through 10. Seasons 8 through 10 were shot at a low resolution, around 480p. While it doesn't look bad, it is stuck at that resolution, since there is no film reel to restore. The only other way to make this season look better is by using AI upscaling technology, and so far it is not the best it can be at the moment, but I still think that season 8 looks fine. One thing about these HiT era episodes is that the episode length extended from 4 minutes and 30 seconds to around 6 minutes. This was done so that they could fit 2 HiT era episodes, 1 classic series episode, 2 Larry segments, and 1 music video to fit the time slot on PBS. The idea of Thomas episodes being longer sounds like an appealing idea and can work, since the Brenner era proves that it can work with 8 minutes and 30-second episodes, but in this season, and somehow only in this season, the episodes tend to drag out more than ever. Sometimes we just get shots that are the engines traveling, and they last a lot longer than they should, I feel. So it makes going through some of the bad episodes of the season last a lot longer than it really should. There's also that fluff in the beginning of episodes that explain that the engines are happy and what jobs they do that make the show feel like it is targeting a younger audience than ever.
The sun was shining brightly. James and Toby were taking children to the seaside. It was a wonderful job. All the engines liked seeing the children's happy faces. All of the engines were very busy and there were lots of jobs to do. Gordon pulled the express and Percy took the mail. He delivered letters and parcels across the whole island. It was a glorious summer day on the island of Sodor. Toby was collecting milk from the dairy. James was pulling passengers to Brendam docks.
Alright, I get it!
Finally, we have the music, and I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I don't hate the music in the HiT era. I don't prefer it over the Mike and Jr. music, since I think those themes are way too iconic, but I think Hartshorn is a good composer and has some good songs in this era. But I do think that most of the good songs are in this season, like the Snow theme and Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow. I really like the chase scene theme in Halloween, but I mean, who doesn't? And while not as good as the previous themes, I think some of the new themes on their own are pretty good, with my favorite being Emily's theme, since it really captures her elegant look. Now we talk about episodes, and I don't have a lot of good to say about these episodes in this season. One of the main problems with the next two eras of Thomas is that they have too much Thomas in them, so a lot of episodes typically seem to blend together. So I think the best way to go about this video is to go through each episode that a character is deleted in, so that means I talk about Thomas's episodes first. Now I don't want to start with the mostly mediocre and bad Thomas episodes, so I'll talk about the Thomas episodes in the season that I actually quite like. Thomas to the Rescue is an episode I always liked. Maybe a very basic episode of Thomas trying to prove his work, but I do think that him proving himself is well justified, and I think Diesel was well written in this episode. Also, this is not a point for this episode, but Michael Brandon did a really good job narrating this episode.
But when Thomas arrived at the quarry, he had a nasty surprise.
Oh, it's you.
Oiled Diesel.
What are you doing here?
I'm here to help Mavis, puffed Thomas proudly.
Steamies can't help, not like a diesel.
That's not true, said Thomas crossly, and he began working at once.
There is also Thomas and the fireworks display. This episode is not the first Thomas and James rivalry story, but I think that this is the first time it shows us how they really work as a duo in an episode, where James in The Trouble with Trees doesn't really show that dynamic off that much, despite how much I love that episode.
Your color's nice, James. Pity about your face, though, said a freight car.
I think this episode really shows it off really well, and you get many great moments in this one.
Hello, busted boiler, teased Thomas. You don't look very useful now. James was upset.
But other than those outliers, I am not the biggest fan of all the other Thomas episodes. I am leaving out a few because I think it would be better to talk about them since the other ones I do like involve another character. Most of his other episodes are just boring moral episodes that don't really offer much and have a similar structure. Like, tell me the difference between Thomas Gets It Right and Too Hot for Thomas. You will find it nearly impossible. Then we have the worst Thomas episode of the season, which is Chickens to School, which shows off how boring episodes can be and the new writing style very well. It is a very dull episode to watch. It has a higher emphasis on morals, and it paints the problem as Thomas's fault when all he did was deliver when his crew and the people on the platform should be pulling out the things they needed from his train. But then again, that would require acknowledgement from the people, which goes against the writer's Bible. I only like the scene where Edward basically chews out Gordon.
Gordon said a really useful engine never needs help, moaned Thomas. Ha! Laughed Edward. I'm always helping Gordon up the hill. Gordon was very embarrassed.
Speaking of Edward, that is the next character to talk about regarding episodes, and I genuinely don't have anything to say with his spotlight episode, Edward the Great. This episode shows the worst of Edward in the HiT era, with how he is depicted as frail, since that is what the Bible wrote about him. It also doesn't help that Gordon is written like pre-season 2 Gordon with how he treats Edward.
Fancy sending a back engine to do an express engine's job, sniffed Gordon.
He does cheer him on later on in the episode, but I feel like he shouldn't have what he said in the beginning of the episode to begin with. I do like how Thomas and Percy are cross with the bigger engines with how they treat Edward.
Thomas and Percy were cross. Edward was their friend. Spencer has a bigger boiler, said Thomas, but that just means more hot air. An honest steamy can beat a pouty puffer any day, added Percy.
This feels very in character with these two. Next is Henry's spotlight episode, Henry and the Wishing Tree, which is one of the worst episodes of the season. It shows Henry as a character who doesn't know how to pull coaches and can only pull freight cars, which is from the Bible, but they show that he can pull coaches in other episodes in this season, so it makes this episode feel even more pointless than ever. Now on to Gordon, and I think that he wasn't given the worst episodes. Gordon Takes Charge is a fine episode for him. It's him teaching Percy how to handle passengers, which is something that makes no sense to me but I will talk about this later. But it's a fine Gordon episode in appearance. But I think his other episode, Squeak, Rattle, and Roll, is not only his best episode in the season, but one of the best episodes of the era. In this episode, Diesel tells Gordon that steam engines are destined to be scrapped, but Gordon just ignores him and goes on taking the express. He only thinks about it again when he starts making a noise that he can't really control unless he really goes slow, which makes him think that he will be scrapped. The next day, he has to take the express to the docks for a trip for his passengers, but he doesn't want Sir Topham Hatt to hear his weird noises, as he goes as slow as he can, but Sir Topham Hatt notices and calls him out.
"Why are you fooling around, Gordon?" he boomed. "You must go quickly, or the children will miss the boat, and that will never do." "Yes, sir," said Gordon sadly.
Gordon decides then and there that if this is his last trip, then he will make it his best one and gives it his all. But of course, the Topham Hatt wouldn't scrap an engine and sends him to the works to be checked out. While we know that Gordon wouldn't be scrapped, I do like that even someone like him is capable of being susceptible to thoughts of being scrapped. Diesel is well written, and I like that Gordon is willing to go out with a bag if it means getting his passengers to their destination on time, which feels very in character for him. Just a great episode. Next we have James episodes, and there are only really 2 episodes to talk about with him. That's already talked about fireworks display. The first one is James gets a new coat, which I have talked a bit about in the James video I did last month, and I have nothing new to say about this one. I think it's a good episode that gets James right, and has the fun Percy and James dynamic. Not much else to add about it. James Goes Too Far is an okay episode for him. It's just James being James, but the forced moral near the end of the episode does ruin it a bit, and it also feels very similar to James's arc in season 1. So, that's something. Next is Percy's episodes, which are all very whatever. Percy's new whistle has a cool crash, but Percy is out of character in this episode for messing with his whistle, which is something that feels like he would do in season 1. Percy's big mistake is also a whatever episode, where he thinks he's going to get scrapped and then makes 2 big mistakes. I honestly felt nothing in this episode. Then there's the final episode of the season, Percy and the Magic Carpet, which has some good character moments that are not Percy, but I don't really have much to say about it. I do find it interesting that this episode had to be fought for to be made, since apparently Abby Grant did not want to disabuse the show's youngest viewers of the notion of magic, despite HiT Entertainment's objections. So, that's something. Next is Toby, and his episode is whatever as well. It suffers from his HiT Bible description, which we will talk about when I get to the characters, but I like some of the little things like Don Douglas gonna mention.
And slate cars for Donald. He even shunted fruit and vegetable cars for Douglas.
And I like it when Percy cheers for him when he is helping Gordon up the hill.
He blew his whistle with excitement. "You can do it, Toby! Go on!" cried Percy.
Finally, we have Emily's episodes, which I like most of them, with my favorite Emily episode being Emily's New Route. This episode got to explore Emily's fears, which makes sense for her as she is still new to the island of Sodor, since she was first introduced in the previous season. It makes her a character you really care for as it goes on. Then we have Halloween, which is one of the best episodes of the HiT era, since it is so much more different from the other episodes of not only the season, but of the HiT era as well. It takes place primarily in the scrapyard, which we rarely see in the show, and I just love how this episode is shot with the angles, camera movements, and sound design. There is nothing like a Scary Thomas episode in terms of its atmosphere. As good as Gordon is a pretty whatever episode that I keep on forgetting it exists, all I remember from it is that Gordon's front bogey wheels are not on the track in the opening section of this episode, and it doesn't really advance much of Emily's character and has a blatant moral. Not much else to say about it. Then there's the worst Emily episode of the season, and contender for one of the worst episodes in the season in general, Emily's Adventure. It suffers from Emily being an unlikable asshole for no reason whatsoever that feels out of character given her true personality, and the blatant morals are the worst in the episode, as it is pretty obvious what the moral is going to be in this episode by the halfway point. Finally, we have to talk about the characters in this season, and this is why the HiT era bio was important to talk about before talking about this season. So let's start with Thomas. I said in the season 7 section of the classic era video that Thomas was starting to regress as a character, instead of the mature Thomas that was in season 5 and to some extent season 6. Even then, I thought Thomas in season 7 had his moments, but in season 8, I don't think that Thomas is coming back for a long time. He feels more like a child than anything in this season. He learns lessons that he honestly should have already learned from the first season of the show, like being patient, sometimes taking it slow is the way to go, and learning to manage your workload, among other lessons. There's also the fact that Thomas seems to fluctuate as a character, where one episode he will be the voice of reason and help a character, and then the next episode he will be an impulsive, impatient character.
"She won't do a thing I tell her." That's because you're a big bossy boiler, laughed Thomas. You should try asking nicely for a change.
That's a very big job for a small engine, chuffed Gordon. You're bound to need some help.
This made Thomas cross. Tank engines don't need help, snapped Thomas. We're really useful.
I do understand why Thomas had to be reverted, since a character that is perfect all the time is pretty boring to follow, which is why I think Edward barely appeared in seasons 4 and 5, but I still feel like they shouldn't have gone this route overall, since it makes Thomas as a character feel so inconsistent. It makes these seasons feel like a soft reboot more than anything. With that being said, there are moments in these episodes that I think Thomas is in character. I mentioned Thomas to the Rescue, where despite the fact that he feels obsolete compared to the Diesels, he still does the job, and I quite like it. I like him Thomas in the fireworks display as he teaches James when he comes to get him and the fireworks train. I also quite like that he is one of the two wedges that defends Edward when Spencer is putting him down. Thomas had his moments in this season, but I think that he was hit hard by the Bible and the fact that he is the main character of the show. Edward, I would also say, was hit pretty hard by the Bible. Edward in this season is shown to be a pathetic character that we should take pity on, which is just so wrong for his character.
But Edward is old and not as strong as the other engines. So sometimes Edward feels left out.
This is being said about the character who once didn't give a flying fuck about what other characters thought of him in season 2. I wouldn't mind this if it was just every now and again, but the fact that this is his character now for the show until the CGI seasons just makes me depressed more than anything. Then we have Henry, which just confuses me more than most other characters. In the Bible, Henry comes off as a character who is only good at one thing and can't really do anything else, which makes no sense when in the show he gave Gordon a run for his money with the express duty, but now he only pulls freight cars?
Henry watched the express leave the station. I'd like to pull passengers, sighed Henry. Just for a change.
I will say that I do like how in these hit seasons, they brought back Henry's nature-loving side, which makes him stand out from the other big engines in the show. Since even back in the Railway series stories, I found it to be too similar to Gordon for him to really stand out as his own character outside of his own book. But I don't really like how Henry was dealt in this era much. Gordon, I think, was one of the best handled characters in this era, and I think most fans tend to agree with that. In Season 8, he was shown to be the same Gordon that we know him as, with very little changes given to him. One of the complaints I have had with Gordon in the model era was that he was always so grumpy, especially in Seasons 5 and 6, which made him a character I never really loved as much as some of the other main characters in the show. And while there are moments of him being a giant asshole in the season, with You Can Do It Toby coming to mind, but I think that all of his other appearances are much more like the Gordon we know, like him showing off in Gordon Takes Charge, him wanting to end on a high note and squeak, rattle, and roll. And even though he is rude to Edward and Edward the Great, he does cheer him on. My favorite Gordon appearance is probably Percy in the Magic Carpet, where he is so unimpressed by Percy's carpet, but when things get bad, he is willing to try and help, which is the Gordon I like the most. Still the same Gordon we know, but is willing to help others. Next is James, who I don't really have a lot to say about. His Bible entry is pretty on point with him as a character, and I think he is the same James we know in this season, with the standouts being James gets a new coat and fireworks display. Again, watch the James video. Next is Percy, which makes me sad because it is so clear that he is now the dumb one of the group, with his Bible entry and how he is portrayed in these episodes.
The railway inspector arrives today,
Sir Topham Hatt said. What's a railway in spectacles? Percy asked.
Railway inspector,
Gordon huffed.
It is also shown that Percy doesn't know how to pull coaches, despite the fact that in this season and in the previous season, including season 7, that he could pull coaches. Percy may be the goods engine on Thomas's branch line, but he is capable of doing more than just goods. However, there are some of the old Percy in this season. I really like him in Gordon Takes Charge, where he starts to get pissed off at Gordon for being the show-off that he is, and when he makes an ass of himself, he shows him up. I think him believing the carpet is magic is very a character, being the somewhat naive character that he is. I like him when James gets a new coat with him teasing James and talks, which is very a character for him. Toby in this era I despise, and it all started here. I have heard that some people think that Toby's downfall as a character started in season 6 and 7, but I would have to disagree there, since I think Toby was well realized in his episodes in those seasons, since he worries for the others around him instead of himself, whereas in these hit seasons, Toby is written similar to Edward, where he is so self-conscious about himself all because he has a tram engine and acts like he isn't as good as the others around him.
But I'll never be able to do Edward's job, Toby cried. He's a proper steam engine.
Unlike Edward, though, Toby doesn't have any moments in this season where I could say I felt the old Toby from the previous seasons in here, which makes him the character I like the least in this season. Finally, we have Emily, and I quite liked Emily in this season. Emily in season 7 was somewhat of a boring character in my opinion, as all she really did was care for other characters around her like Henry and Salty, which didn't really make her stand out. But in season 8, I have to say that she got a personality that is distinctly hers. She does care for other engines, but she's definitely a lot more bossy and headstrong about it compared to someone like Edward. She's a lot more like Lucy from the Peanuts than in season 7, and I think this was the character change that we needed for her, because I love this version of Emily. I also like that this isn't out of nowhere, as in Salty's Stormy Tale tells off Thomas and Percy when they are impersonating Salty for being who he is.
Those be dark clouds, matey, whistled Thomas. There be a fierce storm on the way, Captain, peeped Percy. Emily was cross. It's not nice to copy the way others speak. You hurt Salty's feelings. We were just having fun, said Percy. We'll say sorry to him, added Thomas.
She is still new to Sodor, which is shown in Emily's new route, and they show how she has held up on the island in Emily's adventure. Of all the characters this year, Emily was definitely the most fleshed out. Overall, season 8 is a weird season of the show, with so many changes that were made to it. It went with a new direction that targets a younger audience than before, but still has elements from those older seasons that feel out of place in this season, and with the limited cast and degrading of certain characters, the season makes this one even more like a downgrade than ever. I do think that there are some good qualities to this season, with some good character moments, some good episodes, and the model work still being good, but I would be lying if I said that this is the best season of the HiT era, because I don't think that. But I do understand why someone would say that, but this is a season I rarely go back to, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. 4 out of 10.
The island of Sodor is a very special place. It has hills and valleys, fields and forests. All of Sir Topham Hatt's engines love the island of Sodor.
Season 9 is the HiT season I like the most, but I can't really say that it is a good season. It's really a season with some great episodes and has improvements over the previous season, but I think that the lows of the season are somewhat lower than the last season, and shows some things that will become relevant for the show moving forward for the next few seasons. In simpler terms, this is the season of Thomas so far, and I don't think we'll be getting a season as big as this one anytime, ever. In terms of presentation, I don't really have a lot to say about this one. This season overall looks very similar to the previous season, which is something that will become a trend for the next nearly 8 seasons of the show, which will make talking about these seasons feel more boring than ever. In this season, the weird shots of the close-ups of the characters while moving is not as prevalent. I think it makes the season look better than the previous season. But other than that, I don't really have much to talk about in terms of the standard gauge stuff. The big thing about this season is that they brought back the narrow gauge engines into the series, and in terms of the sets that they are filmed on, I think it does a pretty good job of showing that they live in an area separate from where the standard gauge engines live, with how they travel around areas that are high into the mountains, and how it feels a lot more secluded from the rest of the island. But I will also say that they look the same across the HiT seasons, but I am glad that they brought back the narrow gauge engines, since some time away from the standard gauge characters is a nice change of pace that the show really needed, but that doesn't really change the fact that I am not a fan of how they are written in this season. In terms of anything new with the season, this is the first season that Sharon Miller wrote for the season, which means that the 3 strikes formula has been introduced into the series. But I will say that it isn't as forced or overplayed in this season compared to the other seasons that introduced this formula. It only shows up in Percy and the oil painting, Thomas and the birthday picnic, Thomas tries his best, and the magic lamp. Having the formula itself isn't the worst idea for storytelling, it's just when it's overused that it starts to become an issue, which season 9 doesn't really suffer from. One more thing about this season is that the pacing is much better in this season compared to season 8. There are less shots that just drag out the episode length, and some episodes go straight into the story, so it makes the season less boring to watch altogether. Now there are the episodes of the season, which have some good ones and some bad ones, and will go by character again. Thomas again has the most episodes, and just like the last season, he has a few good episodes, some bad episodes, and some whatever episodes. The whatever episodes are pretty explainable, like Thomas Tries His Best, Thomas in the Toy Workshop, and Thomas in the Birthday Picnic. They are pretty standard HiT era episodes that just exist. Nothing much to say about these episodes, aside from the fact that the Birthday Picnic only has 2 mess-ups from the lead character compared to 3, but this is explained given that there were shots of Thomas going to the beach and then it being cloudy, which would have been the 3rd strike of the story, but this was removed for unknown reasons. In terms of bad episodes, the only one that comes to mind is Thomas and the New Engine. This one just makes no sense to me whatsoever. The plot is that Thomas sees Neville and Harry and Bert and immediately thinks that he is in cahoots with them, which spreads around as Neville is friends with Harry and Bert, which just makes no sense with how certain characters act, like Edward, who just believes in the rumor, which is so out of character for him. It doesn't help that Neville is introduced in this episode. It doesn't add anything of substance to it. He has a total of 4 words in this episode.
Hello, puffed Neville cheerfully. Hello, said Neville happily. Thank you, whistled Neville.
What a riveting character. That's not to say that Thomas doesn't star in some good episodes. In fact, I like his good episodes in this season more than the previous season. Fans speak highly of Thomas and the statue, and for good reason, I'd say. This is an episode that has everyone in character, with Thomas thinking that the statue is himself, which is perfectly in character for him.
Percy, I think the statue is of me, boasted Thomas. Really, Thomas? Yawned Percy. That's safe.
Everyone's starting to get annoyed of Thomas talking about it. Also makes sense. And I love the scene where Percy blows up in front of Thomas, which feels very season 5.
Please stop talking about the statue, peeped Percy. Thomas was surprised. No one wants to hear about it anymore. No one wants to talk to you anymore, Percy added crossly. And neither do I.
I really like how the episode ends, with Thomas willing to plow the line to have everyone show up for the statue unveiling to make it up to them, which means a lot, since Thomas not liking his snowplow is common knowledge.
I'll clear the tracks, tooted Thomas. I don't want any of you to miss the party. The other engines were very surprised. They knew Thomas didn't like wearing his snowplow, and clearing the tracks would make Thomas late to see his statue.
Then it ends with Thomas realizing his mistake and makes it up to them in a very classic Thomas way.
I'm very sorry that I made you all so cross, he puffed. I think this statue of us all is the best statue that could ever be.
In terms of other episodes he has that are good, the ones that come to mind immediately is Thomas's New Trucks, which is one of my personal favorite episodes of this era, since it is a Thomas and James rivalry story, which is one of my all-time favorite character dynamics. Seeing both of them fail at the little competition is so fun to watch.
The trucks bumped into the back of Thomas, and the coal spilled all over the tracks. Just then, Cranky's cable snapped. He dropped a large crate of melons. Bother, huffed James. James, tooted Thomas. I think freight cars like to be useful rather than clean.
I also like Flower Power in Thomas's Day Off, the former for being a fun Thomas Diesel story, and the latter for having Thomas be perfectly in character with how he is pissed with Dennis when he learns that he tricked Thomas. Now there is the Edward episode of the season, Saving Edward. This is a pretty whatever episode of the season that really gets Edward wrong. I don't want to go super deep into this since I'm gonna save it for when I go into Edward in this section, but needless to say, there is a good idea for this concept, but given what we know about the Writer's Bible, this couldn't have worked in this era. I will say that I do like the friendship between Edward and Thomas in this episode, and it shows that Thomas really cares for Edward and is willing to go to such lengths to help him, even if it gets him into trouble.
Thomas, this train is late, he said crossly. And why are you pulling it? Where is Edward?
Thomas didn't want to get Edward into trouble. He had to think of an excuse. Edward took on the wrong sort of coal, sir.
The wrong sort of coal, boomed Sir Topham Hatt. What nonsense, Thomas!
Next is Henry's episode, Henry and the Flagpole. This is a pretty good episode, showing more of Henry's nature-loving side, but not in a stupid way like Henry and the Wishing Tree. Then we have Gordon's lead episode, Respect for Gordon, which is probably the most loved episode of the HiT era. This episode is not only a good Gordon episode, but also a good Steam Team episode. Gordon's firebox makes noises when it is not lit up, which makes him prone to teasing, which he retaliates by being a big asshole and demands that he is shown respect.
But why? Asked Thomas. He was very puzzled.
Because, huffed Gordon grandly, I'm the strongest and the best.
Which makes the other engines hate him even more, which all culminates when he crashes. When he leaves for the works, the other edges take over his job and realize that maybe Gordon does deserve the respect he wants. When Gordon comes back, he apologizes for how he acted, but the others say that he deserves to be respected because he does a lot, which feels very classic Thomas. This episode has a wonderful message about what it means to be actually respected, and about not putting others down for something that they can't help. And it ends on a nice message about working as a team and what it means to be one. Just an all-timer episode. Definitely worthy of the reputation it has. James has one main lead role in this season, which is keeping up with James. This episode is pretty whatever in the season, where James just hates Edward for being slow, which is just typical Edward Writer's Bible nonsense. In terms of Percy episodes this year, there's only one worth talking about, which is the Spotlight episode, Percy and the Oil Painting. This is the first episode of the season that introduces the three-strike formula, but I think I like how this episode handled it more than the other episodes with this writing style. Percy doesn't make any mistakes, he was just doing what he was supposed to do and show off iconic places on Sodor, but the famous artist is so snobbish and has petty remarks.
Too green, he said. I want you to show me somewhere special. The sand is too yellow, he sighed. I want you to show me somewhere special.
But when the artist makes a remark that even offends Gordon, Percy just explodes.
Everywhere on Sodor is special, Pete Percy. And so are the people and the children and the engines. We are all special.
This feels very true to Percy and very different from what is typical from him in this era of the show. But I will talk about that more when I get to how he felt in this season as a character. Toby got a Spotlight episode this season, and I think this is a pretty good episode, given the circumstances. In this episode, everyone is told about a grand opening to a museum, except for Toby, who thinks that Sir Topham Hatt will put him in the museum, which makes Toby worry and work harder than ever to show that he shouldn't be put in the museum. It is worth keeping on the railway. To me, this feels like something Toby would do, but I do think the ending of the episode where he runs from Sir Topham Hatt is really stupid, but other than that, I quite enjoyed it. Emily's Spotlight episode, Emily's Knows Best, is another contender for one of my favorite episodes of the era. What makes this episode really fun is that this is the only showing that I know of with Emily and Toby, and I think it works really well. Emily is her typical bossy self in this episode, which is the characterization I prefer for Emily. What makes this episode is Toby. Toby in this episode feels very much the same Toby from the classic years, which comes when Emily comes and wants to be treated like a queen, and Toby just laughs at her.
You have to be clever to be a queen, he said wisely, and know the right thing to do. I always know what to do, huffed Emily. Toby laughed. That made Emily cross.
A really good moment and episode overall. Now we get into the narrow gauge episodes, and I don't really like any of them, which is not a shock if you know how these characters are written. Scarlowi's Spotlight episode is definitely the worst episode of the season, and probably one of the worst episodes of the show. Scarlowi is written like an absolute child and wants to prove that he is the bravest engine in the world and some bullshit like that, and decides to just climb the incline, which is just not Scarlowi. And for Duncan the Churamon makes no sense.
Look where Scarlowi is, puffed Rheneas. That is the bravest thing to do, chuffed Duncan.
Did we forget what happened in season 6? Here, let me remind you what happened in season 6.
It suddenly snapped. Duncan plummeted down the incline. Help! He yelled.
Yeah, that. Rheneas' Spotlight episode is also bad, since it's about him getting into an argument with Scarlowi over taking the skeleton of a dinosaur, which still just, it doesn't feel like Rheneas. Peter Sam's Spotlight episode was a whatever episode. I like the set design and fog of the episode, but Peter Sam isn't really in character in this episode, since he doesn't believe the tale of Proteus, which just doesn't feel like his character. But I do like that Skarloey is the one who tells the tale. That feels like Skarloey to me. Rusty's Spotlight episode, Tuneful 2, doesn't work for me because Rusty doesn't really feel like Rusty in this episode, since he just does whatever he wants before doing his actual job. There are only 2 narrow gauge episodes I liked in this season, with them being Duncan and the Old Mine and Mighty Mac. Duncan and the Old Mine is an episode that works because Duncan mostly feels in character in this episode, with him getting himself stuck in the mine, which feels very much like Duncan, and with Rusty warning him about the mine and looking for him when he is missing. It's a fun little Duncan adventure story. Mighty Mac is good because it does what very few new character episodes ever do, which is have the episode actually focus on the new character. Most episodes that focus on a new character is not really about the new character, like the other new character episodes in the season that introduced Molly, Neville, and Dennis. But Mighty Mac goes into Mighty Mac as a character, and I think it is all the better for it. And I like this episode quite a bit, and consider it one of the HiT era's best episodes. Finally, we have the characters, and I will go over the standard gauge characters worth talking about, and then get into the narrow gauge characters, and then the new characters of the season. Thomas in this season is the same as last season, where sometimes he is depicted as a naive and patient character, and then in other episodes he is depicted as a voice of reason, and I hate it so much. But I think Thomas was slightly better in this season compared to season 8, all because they got his character more right in this season. There are moments in this season I can point to where Thomas is in character. Thomas joining Percy and teasing Gordon in respect for Gordon, Thomas thinking the statues of himself and telling it to everyone, Thomas getting mad at Dennis and Thomas's day off, and pretty much all of Thomas's new trucks with Thomas and James, and I love the rivalry so much, oh my god! Edward in this season makes no sense to me whatsoever. In a Spotlight episode, Edward is depicted as someone who is old and pathetic because he starts wheezing, which leads to him thinking that he will be scrapped, which to me just makes no sense, because season 2 shows that Edward is not fearful of being scrapped. Like, if you compare the 2 Edwards, it shows a major difference.
Late again! Edward laughed and James fumed away.
I'm not a really useful engine anymore. So Top of Hat will have to send me for scrap.
Now, even if you ignore all of that, it still doesn't feel natural since he thinks about it immediately compared to Thomas, Percy, and Gordon season 8, where they have similar thoughts, but they aren't immediate. They happen a little later on in the day or the episode that really sets it in for them. TLDR, I don't really like Edward in the season, but this is somehow not the worst he got in this era, oh my god. But we'll come back to that later. In terms of other standard gauge characters that I think are worth discussing, I quite like Percy and Toby this year. Percy in this season feels the most in character he has ever been since the change in direction, and I don't think that will be the same until later on in the show. While he still has those dumb child moments in the season, I do think that he had more of him being in character. He starts teasing Gordon over the noise he makes when his firebox isn't lit.
Rattler Gordon's keeping us all awake, Pete Percy.
And Emily knows best, it is shown that Percy looks up to Toby, and I like that a lot, and he explodes in 2 episodes this season, with the first one being the famous artist in the premiere episode, which I already showed, and the second time is when he is fed up with Thomas talking about the statue. This feels like Percy to me, the young cheeky engine that explodes when he feels put down or belittled. Toby this year was pretty good as well. I talked about his Spotlight episode with how he goes out doing the best he can, but I want to talk about his other major appearance, which is the episode Emily knows best. This episode may be about Emily, but Toby is definitely the highlight of this episode. We get the Percy and Toby duo that I really like, where Percy looks up to Toby. Toby feels in character in this episode with him straight up laughing at Emily when she says she knows what's right, and him helping her get help. While I wouldn't say that Toby was great this season, I didn't dread him like last year, and spoiler alert, future seasons of the show. Now we get into the narrow gauge characters who are returning from season 7, and I have very few nice things to say about them. These characters feel all out of character, and I would not be surprised if that was what they were pitched to come back. Skarloey and Rheneas in their premiere seasons were old, wise characters, but in this era of the show, they feel more childish than ever, with Skarloey thinking he will be considered brave if he climbs up the incline, which is still the dumbest thing I've ever fucking seen, and Rheneas getting into an argument over who is going to take the dinosaur skeleton. The only positive I have with Skarloey is that I like how he tells the tale of Proteus to the other narrow gauge engines. Peter Sam was the optimistic character of the narrow gauge fleet, but in this season, he just straight up doesn't believe in the legend of Proteus whatsoever, which doesn't feel like the Peter Sam we know.
The magic lamp I know isn't true. It's just an old story and quite silly too.
Rusty was the cautious engine, always putting others' needs before himself, keeping the railway safe. But in the Spotlight episode, he just does whatever he feels like, which gets him into trouble, which doesn't really feel like Rusty at all. I do like in Duncan in the Old Mine, he does go out to find Duncan, but I can't really say I like him. Duncan this season, I wouldn't say is bad, but he more so feels neutered than anything. In a Spotlight episode, when he learns that he won't be taking the visit to the caves, he sulks about it.
Duncan was very disappointed. He wanted to go to the caves.
This doesn't feel like Duncan to me. Duncan would complain about it and constantly say that he is overworked like he has in the past.
I'm overworked and I won't stand it.
The rest of the episode does depict Duncan like he typically is, so I like that. I overall can't say that I am a fan of the way these characters are written, which sucks because they make the world of Sodor feel a lot more lived in than when it was just the standard gauge engines. This season gave us 4 new characters who are Molly, Neville, Dennis, and Mighty Mac. Molly and Neville are characters I honestly don't have a lot to talk about because they are basically nothing to me. Molly is shy, and that is really about it. And Neville doesn't speak much, if at all, which makes me sad because they are amazing props, but they rarely do anything. Dennis is one that makes me sad the more I think about him, because I think Dennis is an interesting character to introduce to the series. He is a lazy character who tricks the other engines to do all the work for him, which is a fun idea for the show, but he only shows up in one episode and never shows up or speaks again afterwards. Shame. Mighty Mac is probably the most fleshed out new character in this season, since they got an episode that explored their personality, but even then, they never show up again afterwards. But that was always kind of the plan with these characters. They were made to sell toys and then they take their leave, which sucks since some of them have potential that fans were able to squeeze out. In fact, I will recommend the stories Former Express Engine and All Eyes on Dennis, which are stories that further develop Molly and Dennis as characters, which I quite like. Overall, season 9 is a season that I have mixed feelings on. They made some improvements over the previous seasons, but they added aspects that ruined some characters and episodes. But I can't deny that they did fix some characters and made some pretty enjoyable episodes of the season. It's the most mixed season of the show, and that alone makes it the best season of this era. 5 out of 10.
Every day is a busy day for the engines of the narrow gauge controllers railway. They toot hello as they pass each other on the hills. Huff and puff at the transfer yards. And push and pull freight cars at the wharf.
Season 10 may not be the start of the downfall of the show. I would say the creation of the Bible is what started the downfall of the show. But Season 10 is the season that really set into motion the next 7 years of the show's future, showing its deck for what is to come. Which makes this season one I really hate, but I don't think this is irredeemable, since there are some things in this season that I think are pretty good. But for now, let's just get into the presentation, which is going to be pretty short this time. This season looks the same as season 9, which means that the model work is still top notch, but it all looks and feels repetitive. There are no new innovations to this season, so this is the season that changed the least. But they did introduce a new area in the season, which is the wharf. The wharf feels like a natural addition to the show, even though it was most likely made to have Thomas and James show up in the episodes surrounding the narrow gauge engines. While the narrow gauge engines are mostly seen in the mountains with all the rocks, hills, and cliff tops, the wharf shows them in an area of industry, which is a nice visual change from the typical location and doesn't feel out of place whatsoever, since wharfs were a real thing that narrow gauge engines and standard gauge engines would be on. But other than that, season 10 is not a looker. Now, let's get into the episodes of this season, because there are a lot of stinkers in this one. Thomas once again got the most episodes, and I don't like any of them. The only ones I can get enjoyment in are Follow That Flower and Thomas and Scarlowy's Big Day Out. The former is a Thomas and James rivalry story, which are fun, but this is one of the weaker ones for me, since it has that repetitive nature that these later hit era seasons suffer from, and the later is mostly just for the model work, since they cleverly used the Gauge 1 Thomas with the old Scarlowy model, and then switch it to the bigger Scarlowy and Gauge 3 Thomas, but that is really about it. Nothing else of note. Most of the Thomas episodes this year are just really forgettable and boring, but Thomas does get one of the worst episodes of the season, and if you have seen this show, you know what episode I am talking about. Thomas's Frosty Friend, my favorite. This episode actively insults the intelligence of the viewer because of how stupid Thomas is in this episode. A snowman balloon gets gets attached to the back of Thomas's buffers, and Thomas straight up thinks that he is the real snowman that is following him everywhere he goes. And this goes on for like 5 fucking times throughout the episode, which makes it feel like the longest episode of the series, which in turns make the viewer feel really bored. I don't know what to add to why this episode is so bad. Almost everyone has said why it is bad. If you have not seen this episode, watch it to understand why people think that. Edward's spotlight story is also one of the most infamous episodes in the series and is my pick for the worst episode of the season. In Edward Strikes Out, Edward straight up thinks that the new character, Rocky, is not very useful and decides to not use him when he needs pipes to be lifted from the tracks, which is already so stupid, but gets even dumber when Gordon suddenly speeds on the line and derails off the track, which makes no logical sense whatsoever, since there isn't even a scene of him applying his brakes. So it just happened, and you are left to accept it, whether you like it or not. Another episode that, if you haven't seen, you need to watch it to see it all happen. Henry had a pretty good episode this year with Big Strong Henry. This episode spotlights Henry, showing how strong he is, but Gordon is constantly belittling him. Even though realistically, Henry is about as strong, if not stronger than Gordon, but I do like that Henry wins in the end of this episode. Though I do find it weird that the thing that stops Gordon from winning are cows, which feels like a callback from season 2. But knowing how these seasons were made, it most likely wasn't. Once again, Gordon got a really strong episode this season with the standout episode, It's Good to Be Gordon. This episode is not perfect since it's the start of Henry's special coal retcon, which is one of the dumbest things the show has ever done, but I do think that it tells a really good story about Gordon. See him give up the one thing he worked hard for just to help Henry out, which is something that Gordon never really did before, from what I can remember, and further develops Gordon and Henry's dynamic, because after this in the model run of the show, this dynamic never showed up again, so I think it is safe to say that this was a great finale to that dynamic. Next we have James's episodes, which is one of the best episodes of the entire HiT era, and I've already talked about this episode in the James video, but needless to say, James's second best shows a different side of James that we rarely if ever see for the character. I also like how Edward was used in this episode, since it isn't about him being an old fart worried about getting scrapped or a dumbass who is also an asshole for stupid reasons. He is a side character that is shown to be well liked by all the other characters, which is how you want to do Edward as a side character. Just an overall fantastic episode, and one of my personal favorite James stories. Percy got 2 episodes, and I don't really like any of them. The first is just Percy trying to do the job he doesn't want to do so that he can feel special, and the other episode is about him taking over the railway while Tom has away, and it goes about how you expect. I genuinely have nothing to say about these episodes other than that the latter was done better in season 21 with Dowager Hat's busy day. Toby got 2 episodes this season, and just like Percy, I have almost nothing to say about them because it's the same Toby from season 8 instead of the Toby from season 9, which I like. Toby's Afternoon Off is a bad episode where Toby doesn't think anyone wants to hang out with him because they hate him or he is different or etc. It's a nothing episode. And Toby's New Shed is a fine episode with an okay moral, but it feels more like a Thomas episode than a Toby episode because Toby is barely in this episode, so it feels wrong to have Thomas be the star of the episode when Toby is in the name. Emily got 1 episode this season, and I think it's a pretty good one. What makes this episode one of the better ones of the season is how it gives us a different view on Diesel. Emily is very dismissive of Diesel when he is trying to tell her some news, which leads to Diesel taking Gordon's special coaches from Emily. When Emily finally gets him back, she sees that Diesel is leaking smoke from his engine. Diesel tells Emily that his engine is faulty and that he has broken a record like Gordon, but it was a shunting record. But since no one cares that much about a Diesel, he wasn't recognized for his efforts, which leads to Emily feeling bad for Diesel, which leads to her getting him a new engine for him. I think this episode does a lot for Diesel with how we see a different side from him, which will later be covered in the CGI series. Now we get into the narrow gauge episodes, and there are really only 1 episode I like in here, which is Duncan's Bluff. Duncan's Bluff works because Duncan is in character in this episode, and he is paired up with James. I said this in my James video, god I am saying that a lot, but these two have some of the best dialogue in the HiT era.
You were a long time getting here, teased Duncan. You're lucky I came at all, wheezed James crossly. I've got an important job to do later. I'm taking some children to a concert. Oh, is doing 2 jobs in 1 day too hard for you? Duncan chuffed cheekily. Ha, snorted James.
This episode turns into one giant pissing contest between 2 airheads, and it's just so fun to watch. It feels somewhat out of place in this era of the show, because I can very much see this type of episode or story working in season 6. and it is another contender for one of my favorite episodes of this era. The other Duncan episode, I don't really have anything to say. It's just Duncan being a dumbass over a bell. Really nothing else to say. Sir Handel gets an episode about him coming back from the quarry, which some fans headcanon as to why he had disappeared after season 4, but we will get to that in a little bit. But I don't have anything to say about this episode since it does what every other episode of the season does. A new character Freddy got an episode, but it is tied to Scarlo and Reneas, and it doesn't really offer much outside of the fact that Freddy is a mid-Sodor engine.
Fearless Freddy is back, puffed Freddy.
I didn't know you two were friends, Chuff Thomas.
Oh yes, puffed Sir Handel. Freddy was the fastest engine in the hills.
Rusty got an episode about him losing his passengers and getting confused, and I have nothing to say about it. Reneas gets an episode about him doing Scarloi's work and then losing his trucks, which is something I also don't have anything to say about it. Then Scarloi gets an episode and is contended for the worst episode of the season since it is very boring. It feels like nothing happens in Wharf and Peace, despite the fact that so many cool model stunts happen, like a truck breaking apart, Scarloi going through flooded track, and him getting hit with logs which dent his side tanks. But the pacing of this episode makes it feel like it all happened so spread out that it leads to you feeling more bored than anything. Honestly, season 9 was better for the narrow gauge than this season. Finally, we have the characters, and just like the season 9 segment, I am only really going to be talking about the noteworthy characters of this season, so there won't be a lot. I don't really want to talk about Edward in the season, but I need to, because this is his worst season by far. Edward in this Spotlight episode is a major dumbass and doesn't feel in character. He is told by Gordon that he doesn't look all that useful, which leads to Edward believing everything that he said and treating Rocky like an asshole.
Can I come with you? Asked Rocky. I could help you with those heavy pipes.
I don't need your help, sniffed Edward. Newfangled nonsense.
I somehow hate this version of Edward even more than how he was portrayed in the previous seasons, because he is more unlikable and more out of character than those versions of Edward. On a brighter note, I really like Henry and Gordon in this season. They each got 2 episodes that focus on them. One episode focuses more on Henry, and the other focuses more on Gordon. Henry, while not being the best in this era, did overall fare much better than most of the other characters, and I do like what he has with Gordon in this era and how it is played out. Henry is trying to be on par with Gordon, but Gordon either helps Henry out or makes an ass of himself. I love it the most, and it's good to be Gordon, where Gordon sacrifices his want to beat his speed record to help out Henry. Feels like the Gordon we know, but Gordon then beats his record and Emily the special coaches, which was the goal he was striving for this season, and I think it makes these 2 characters stand out. I don't think I need to talk about James in this segment because I already talked about his major appearances in the season in my video talking about him, but long story short, they tackled his typical nature well in Duncan's Bluff and his rivalry with Thomas, but also tackled his more insecure side with James the second best. He was the bright spot of this season, and definitely the best character in this season if you ask me. Sadly, I can't say the same about Toby. I liked how Toby was written in season 9 since it wasn't the Toby that was from the Bible and felt more like the Toby we knew in those older seasons. But here he is back to being someone who thinks that no one likes him and thinks he's weird. That just isn't Toby whatsoever. And I don't like this other side of that trait he was in this season that isn't Toby's new shed, where he can't even tell Thomas that he doesn't want a new roof on his shed, which just doesn't feel like Toby and makes him look even more insecure than ever. This Toby is here to stay, and you must accept that. I don't really have anything to say about any of the narrow gauge engines, except for Duncan. I said in the season 9 segment that Duncan is the only narrow gauge character to mostly not be affected by the HiT Bible that much, and that stays true here with Duncan's Bluff being his best appearance and episode of the season. Duncan's banter with James is already fun, but we see his mischievous side in this episode, and it just works really well and feels like the character.
Soon, all the cars were hidden. Now, James will think I've delivered all the coal. Duncan chuffed cheerfully.
A good season for him. Now let's move on to the new characters and returning faces, and we will go in episode order. Sir Handel returns in this season, and I am personally not a fan of how he has changed. Sir Handel in the older seasons was a character who was very competitive, arrogant, and naive, whereas in this era of the show, he is portrayed as a wise old engine, which makes no sense to me. Like, we go from his getting into a scuffle with George to him just being the Jesus Christ of the narrow gauge engines. Just feels so wrong to me, and it is written in the HiT Bible as well. I don't know where they got this from, but it doesn't sound and feel right to me. I do know that some fans choose to headcanon that Sir Handel matured while he was away at the quarry, which would make sense if his return to the show was addressed as years and not the summer like the episode says.
Sir Handel had been working in the stone quarry all summer. The narrow gauge controller, Mr. Percival, was happy to see him back.
Which makes that theory not true, but I do like the idea behind it. Next we have Jeremy, the jet plane, who was made to sell toys, since the airport from Calling All Engines needed a face associated with it. I honestly have nothing to say about Jeremy. He is a character that just exists. Next we have Freddy, who has the interesting lore reveal about him being a mid-solar engine back in the day. But other than that, he is another character that exists to me. He is coupled with the fact that he is old and that is it. I do like his design though. Next we have Rocky, who is also a character that exists. Though I do find it funny that most of these characters that have the potential to have interesting developments or backstories were dropped from the show when it switched to CGI. Yet Rocky somehow lived on through the rest of the show until the very end. But yeah, not much to say about him as a character. And then we have Rosie, who is such an interesting character in the fandom, because I think most fans agree that she was made to appeal to the female audience of the show. But the fact that she only gets one episode in this season that doesn't really explore much about her as a character, is more focused on Thomas, makes her feel more like a character that was made for toys more than ever, when all the other new characters in the season were made for toys. But Rosie has that feeling more than the others. But it is interesting that they kept her alive for a few years after the season, and when they brought her back for a bit in the late 2010s. But I don't have much to say about her, because other fans and well-known Thomas YouTubers have talked in depth about her already. I overall didn't like Season 10. This season took everything that I didn't like with Season 8 and made it a whole lot worse. The stories are starting to be more repetitive, some of the characters are settling into their personality traits, and it overall just starts to become more stupid at the same time. Some of the characters are settling into their new personality traits, and overall just become stupid more and more. There are redeeming aspects in this season, with some great episodes, some characters that get some new things or feel true to themselves, and it has James, arguably at his best in this season. But this is by far the worst season of the show up to this point. But we have 2 more of these left. 3 out of 10.
It was an important day on the island of Sodor. A new library was going to be opened. Everyone was excited.
Season 11 is another season of the show, which is basically the best way to describe this season for me. I don't think it is all that good, but I will say that I like it more than Season 10. But I would still say that Season 8 and 9 are better than this season. I think one of the most notable things about this season is that it has a different look compared to the other model seasons of the show. For some reason, the season has a yellow tint, making the shots look more yellow than ever before, which makes the season look very ugly. If you look at the snow episodes of this season, it makes the snow look like it's full of pee. I did some research last year as to see why there was a yellow tint, and the Thomas Wiki said that the yellow tint is there because, according to Simon Spencer, the producer and showrunner of Thomas until 2008, it was to give the impression that the show was still being recorded using film stock. Fans have been able to remove the yellow tint as best as they can, and if you could find those versions of the episodes, that would be all for the better. Other than that, I think that this season looks about the same as the other seasons of the era, but there are some slight improvements I noticed. This season and season 12 were shot at 1080p compared to the 480p of seasons 8 to 10. This led to them using HD cameras in this season, and I think it makes the show look higher quality than in the previous HiT seasons. The shadows have more definition than being soft, the colors pop out more, and the sets, while not the best looking sets of the model run, do have more going on with the backdrops that returned in this season. If the yellow tint is on, it's a contender for the worst looking season of the model era, but with it removed, I think it is one of the best looking seasons of the HiT run of the show. Now let's get into the episodes, which is gonna take a bit. Thomas once again gets the most lead roles, but I do think that he has some good ones in the season compared to season 10. Thomas in the Storyteller, while not an amazing episode, is a good reminder that he is a good engine at heart. Thomas in the Runaway Car is a pretty fun episode to watch, with the chase and seeing Gordon's relationship with Thomas being show off, and True Moment is a pretty good episode with Thomas trying to be better than Spencer, which feels very much like Thomas to me. Though I feel like this would have been better as a Percy episode, since his whole thing is that he gets angry when he is getting put down by the bigger engines. But that's just me. Other than Hector the Horrid, the Thomas episodes this year are still pretty mid or bad, with Thomas in the Lighthouse being probably his worst episode of the year. But almost all of his episodes this year feel the same, so I don't really have much to say about his eps in this season, which will most likely be the case for the next season. Edward and the Mail is such a bad episode for all the reasons you expect with Edward episodes at this point. He is shown to be someone who is old and pathetic, and he doesn't really have much going for him in terms of his character, which makes watching this episode feel like a snore fest most of the time. But somehow Edward gets worse in the next season. Just wait. Henry's episode, Henry's Lucky Day, is a whatever episode that doesn't really offer anything, and it's just about Henry looking for his lucky trucks. Gordon and the Engineer, however, is one of the best episodes of the season. What makes this episode stand out is not only this season, but in this era of the show, is that it does something that was basically thrown out the window by season 6, which is utilizing railway practices. If you don't know, season 6 of the show brought in new writers like I mentioned in the previous Thomas videos, but this led to episodes of the show having some unrealistic moments in it, like Thomas being able to push snow away without a snowplow, Percy being able to go up the coal chute without causing it to break, and all of Edward the Really Useful Legend. Now, it's not to say that this style of writing automatically makes episodes bad. I mean, It's Only Snow is one of my favorite episodes of season 6, and is one of my go-to examples on how you should write a post-season 4 Thomas. But it was very clear that the realism of episodes from the previous seasons would never be the same again. But this episode actually did its homework. The main plot point is that the points on the main line stop working, which means that all trains just stop, which the episode acknowledges when Gordon needs to go back and get the engineer. He can't go backwards with the express, which is something that railways have to do. And the way that they handle is clever, with Gordon going light engine down the line and having Donald and Douglas help him with grabbing the engineer, which doesn't break any railway safety protocols, and I like that. Also, Donald and Douglas are in this episode, and while we don't get a lot of them, they are serotonin compared to nothing but the steam team and the gauge engines from the past few seasons. This episode isn't a masterpiece by any means, and you won't get the most out of it if you aren't into trains or railways, similar to Gordon and Spencer, but I do quite enjoy this one. James has a pretty predictable episode, learning not to be vain. Nothing really to talk about with that one. Same with Percy's episodes and Toby's, but Emily's episode is actually an interesting one. Emily's Rubbish is a pretty funny episode, but I like it because it delves into the side of Emily that is insecure about being around the new toy of the episode, Whiff, and I think the episode has some pretty fun moments, like Whiff being able to find Emily no matter where she is. Just a good time. One episode I need to mention is Hector the Horrid, and that's because it is probably the second best new character episode in the show up to this point. It shows us a different take on a truck in the series, which I find pretty interesting. Hector is horrid like the episode title implies, but after Thomas puts him in his place, he reveals why he is so horrid, and it's an interesting develop for a character we probably thought was a terrible person, but instead we care for him and we learn more about him. I don't want to go too in depth on Hector right now, as that is what talking about the new characters are for, but I think this episode is pretty great for the HiT era. For narrow gauge, this one will be hard to talk about, because there are 6 episodes, but only one I like, which is Cool Truckings. Cool Truckings is one of the best episodes of the season, and the simple reason is that it doesn't really feel like a typical Thomas episode, and more like a Jack in the Pack episode. The Pack episodes were more focused on the road characters for one, but the humor is also very much like the Pack series with character interactions and the very British feel of it, which Cool Truckings offers. Also, this is the best looking episode of season 11, with the Winter Mountainsides looking amazing. But other than that, I literally have nothing to say about the other episodes. Scarlet is afraid of a thunderstorm, which is really stupid. Freddy needs to find a bell for Mr. Percival's bike, and Duncan wants to go on other jobs beside his own. They are just typical narrow gauge HiT era episodes that really don't offer anything aside from Cool Truckings. Now on to the characters that I think are worth mentioning this season, and then the new characters. I mentioned some of the characters during the episode section, like Edward and Henry, but that's only because we are in that era of the show where most characters only get one episode. So there really isn't a lot to talk about regarding them, but I did try hard to find something to talk about regarding the mainstay characters. Henry in his episode feels somewhat odd to me, and I can't really pinpoint as to why that is. I get the vibe that he's becoming more of a worrywart in this episode than in his next appearance in the show, but I could be wrong about that, and that he could be more self-conscious. Needless to say, Henry feels off in this season to me, and that might be because of the fact that he isn't paired with Gordon or being a tree hugger like he typically is. Emily is worth talking about in this season because of the fact that she was different from her typical bossy Lucy-inspired personality. In her Spotlight episode, she is insecure about being around Whiff, who is basically the nerd of the show, but is actually just an engine that is hard to be around because of his odor. This is a side of Emily we've never, if rarely, seen in this era, but I feel like this is where her CGI incarnation stems from. Similar to Henry, since Emily in CGI starts to become more insecure, which is a change I do not like whatsoever, but I like it in this episode since it's not her only thing. Gordon once again is worth talking about because Gordon is one of the best characters in this era. I already mentioned Gordon the Engineer and how I like it for doing something the show dropped after season 6, but I like Gordon this season with his secondary appearances, since he is much nicer than typical. Gordon is well known for being a snooty, pompous asshole, and I do like that side, but I always champion a blend of that and Gordon being nice, which is something seasons 5, 6, and the Brennan era of the show failed at. Season 11 does tend to make Gordon more nice, which makes his portrayal in season 7 and 8 better than him in season 11, but I like his friendship with Thomas. It's clear that in this season, they have each other's backs, like when Thomas tells Gordon about using his line to get to the engineer.
Maybe you could go on my line, puffed Thomas. That's a good idea, puffed Gordon. Thank you, Thomas.
Or when Gordon helps Thomas in Spaceship and Runaway Car. I also like that Gordon, while he can't stop and help Thomas, has a worried face on him, which shows that he would have stopped and helped him. This season makes the alliance they made in season 1 feel a lot more real than most of the classic era, I would say. Gordon was great this year, and I would change very little about him here. Now on to the new characters this season, and because I can't really talk about the narrow gauge in this one. And once again, we are going order of appearance with the production order. First we have Whiff, who I actually don't really mind at all. He is made to be the outcast character, who is a bit nerdy and a bit hard to be around sometimes, with the job that almost no one wants to do. But I do like that they show that he actually likes doing the job that he is given, and doesn't get discouraged when he is being talked down to, especially when engines are talking down to him in front of his face.
Who's your smelly new friend with the funny whistle, Emily? Snorted James.
We smelt you coming for miles, wished Gordon grandly.
My name's Whiff, whistled Whiff.
It suits you, laughed Henry. Whew.
Whiff is a character I like, but I do find it weird that he got the okay to be in CGI compared to other characters from this era like Mighty Mac. Next we have Madge, who is a character I quite like. This was the first new road character in the show since Elizabeth in season 6. I like that she was intended to be attached to the narrow gauge engines and has the gimmick of being a loader that could carry engines. It could lead to many story ideas. Although I do think she only works in this era of the show since the narrow gauge engines are all dumb and stupid, which contrasts with Madge's personality of being mature. But I do think it would be cool to see her again in another incarnation. Next we have Hector the Low Loader, who is another character I really like. The series hasn't introduced a new truck since Scruffy in season 4, and I think Hector works within the confines of the show. In his episode, he is shown to be such a horrid character with how he treats Bill, Ben, Thomas, and Rosie, but when it is revealed that he's afraid of being filled up with coal, you start to see that Hector isn't a bad character, and when he overcomes his fear, realize that he is a nice guy underneath it all. Having a nice truck character can lead to many clever stories, but he only appears in this season and the next season, and it baffles me that they did that. Finally, we have Billy. Talking about him would feel pretty much like a segment from another video regarding either season 11 or Billy himself. Billy appears in one episode of the show because he is the toy first and foremost, but his personality is complete and utter dog shit, where it's shown that he straight up hates being told what he is supposed to do and tells anyone off for trying to tell him what to do. TLDR, Billy is an asshole and he is definitely one of the worst characters in the show alongside Samson. God, I hate Samson. Season 11 of the show has more in common with season 10 than I remembered. It has the same problems as that season, but I think that season 11 has not only more good episodes than season 10, but also has unique ideas with its good episodes a lot more than season 10. But I will say that season 10's highs are higher than season 11. Depending on the day I will tell you this, I like season 11 more than 10, but at the moment, I think I like 10 a bit more than 11. 3 out of 10.
Knapford is the biggest station on the island of Sodor. All the engines love its bustling busyness. Today was a very special day. It was Knapford Station's birthday.
Season 12 is the most unique season, and not only the HiT era, but in the entire show. And I think you can tell why that is with how the season looks. This is the HiT era season I have the least experience with out of the 5, which is funny given that season 11 only had one DVD release in the US. But rewatching this season for the video and knowing more about the behind the scenes of the season makes me feel somewhat bad for the model crew than anything else when watching it. So let's get into this season. The presentation of this season is the most defining thing about this season, more than any other in this era of the show. The big thing with this season is that the train's faces all move when they talk, and you are either for this idea or against it. It was always the plan for the season to introduce CGI into the series, with this season and a few more after this one. But after the season, they went full CGI the next year. One thing I can say is that I respect HiT for deciding to do a hybrid before they made the full transition into full CGI, compared to how other shows handle it, including how Thomas handled a visual change when going from Big World Big Adventures to All Engines Go. Even if plans for more seasons like this style were scrapped, I do think they handle it gracefully. Now, as for the CGI itself, it is very dated, since it is technology that was being implemented in 2008. It's not like Pixar, where a movie from as early as 2006 still looks like a modern CGI movie. There are little things about the CGI in this season that also shows this off well, like on certain angles of the face don't match the shot, with this shot of Thomas being probably the most famous example. Sometimes the color temperature of the faces doesn't match the lighting or tone of the shot that they are shooting, with the wharf at sunset being the most clear example. It's pretty clear that these blemishes and the overall quality of the CG that is in this season looks very 2008 and will continue to look worse the more time passes. But I do think that there are benefits to the CGI used in this format. Now that the faces can move and talk, it can convey so much more emotion in life than before, with little things like people moving or talking in the background or the foreground of shots to make the world feel a lot more lived in. Animals are all CG now, so we can get birds flying off in the distance of a shot. The faces in the season are the most unique compared to all of CGI Thomas, because they tried their best to make the faces look as accurate to the model faces as best they could, with little details that were added that make the show feel a lot more alive than ever. Now, despite that, there is one thing about the faces this year that makes no sense. It's inconsistent. Now, what I mean by this is that there will be some shots where the characters are far away and they will have a CGI face, and then sometimes they will be up close and have their model face. Now, I don't mind the fact that they have the model faces, and it probably saved on money with shots like this one where Percy is really far away, or if a character is going fast. But when it flip-flops on what face to use for certain shots, it makes no sense and gives the CGI faces a feeling of inconsistency. Now that the CGI is out of the way, let's get into why this is the worst looking season of the model run of the show. Now, I don't really have much to say on this presentation of the sets, since they all look the same, but in season 12, they somehow made enough of a change for me to notice that they all look really bad. They put so many bushes and green trees and shrubs all over the sets that it makes the island look so overgrown. There are even certain shots that have almost nothing in them, which makes the world of Sodor feel less lived in than ever. There are also just coaches randomly placed throughout the season that just makes no sense to me. If you needed something on the set, at least make the rolling stock diverse or have engines wait at a red light or something. This season looks like garbage. Now, let's get into the episodes of the season, and I am dreading this section because we are now in that spot of the show where all the episodes feel the same and we have to describe the little details that make them different. Fuck. There has been a change that will be kept until season 16 of the show, which is that there are only 20 episodes a season now, which will make my job of talking about them less painful. Thomas once again has the most lead roles in this season, and I generally have nothing to say about them because Thomas is the dumbest motherfucker in this season. Edward's episode is contender for the worst episode of the season, which is becoming a trend with these hit seasons. Since they say it with me now, he is out of character. Instead of the typical hit era episode we see in seasons 8 through 11, he acts more like James in his episode, which just feels so wrong. And then there are the typical stupid moments that plague season 12. Henry's episode was pretty bad, but I don't mind it as much as they go back to focusing on a softer nature side, but it also has the stupid moments. Goran's episode is one of the least bad ones, which is typical of what you expect from this era. It is easily the weakest Goran episode of the era, because once again, the stupid moments that plague the season. But I like seeing Stanley get some spotlight, even though he is barely used in this season. I have already talked about James works it out in the James video, but needless to say, this is probably the least bad episode of the season, and would say that it is pretty okay, since the sets look better than all the other sets in the season, and I like the James and Hector dynamic, which I'll talk a bit more about in the character section. Percy's episode was whatever, I don't really remember much of it. Toby's episode is probably one of the lesser bad episodes, since he doesn't have that stupid personality change of how he thinks no one likes him, and I like that he rediscovers Sodor tramways that gets carried over to another episode. But other than that, not much to say about his episode. Excellent Emily is pretty bad for Emily is just a major dumbass in this one, and it's pretty clear that the only defining thing about this episode is that Murdoch gets a focus on it, which is cool because he hasn't been focused on since 7-11, and I like Murdoch. Rosie got an episode all to herself, which makes this episode the most unique out of any of them, because she never got a focus episode before, and is probably the only other secondary character to get a focus episode, other than Mighty Mac and Madge. But it is still bad for the same reason as all the other episodes in this season. Now we get into probably the most infamous episode of the entire season, which is Push Me, Pull You, and I'm gonna say what everyone else had to say about this episode. But this is the most brain-dead slop episode of the entire series up to this point, because it is very clear that these characters are straight up not the same characters, that they are so many stupid things happen in this episode, like the fact that Scully is shown to have his brakes work, but doesn't use them when he's running into the pond, which is just straight up stupid. This episode does mental damage to you. Let me tell you, stay away from this episode if you can, please. For your well-being. Next is Mountain Marvel, which is another one of the least bad episodes of this season, since it has some continuity tied to season 9 with the magic lamp, and I like it, since it is rare that you see continuity in the HiT era. It also has the least stupid plot in the season alongside James works it out, but still not all that good. Duncan in the hot air balloon pisses me off because while this is not the first bad Duncan episode in the HiT era, since that technically started in season 10 with Duncan drops a clanger, but this episode is just one of the stupidest episodes of the show, as there's no logic to be found in this one, as Duncan carries the hot air balloon to Mr. Percival, but for some reason the balloon is filled up with air, so why did they do this? Finally, there's Freddy's spotlight episode, Party Surprise, which doesn't feel like a Freddy episode since Freddy is one of the wiser characters in the HiT era narrow gauge fleet. So for him to just do all of these dumb things on the spot just makes no sense at all. Also, the US dub for this episode is bad.
It was a surprise for Colin, sir. Colin has never been to a party.
Mr. Percival thought having the party at the wharf was a very good idea. But you should have asked me first.
Ah, yes, sir.
If I work quickly, I can still put everything right.
I hate almost all of these episodes. Only watch James work it out at Mountain Marvel. Avoid everything else. Let's move on to the characters, and I know that this is gonna be the hardest segment of this section to write for, because most of the characters are all the same. For the new characters, I really don't have much to say about them. Hank feels out of place in the show, since he is an American locomotive in a British looking show, but he is probably the most memorable new character in the season. Flora had the potential to be a memorable character, but ended up being one of the gluppiest shittos in all of Thomas. She is on the same wavelength as Neville in terms of how interesting they are, but she really didn't need to be. In one of the books about her and in her biography, it said that she switches between rail wheels and road wheels, which is an interesting concept for a character that would later be implemented into Flynn in Day of the Diesels, but they don't really utilize them for Flora in the show, so we just have to picture how different it would be. Then there's Colin, who is a crane at the wharf, and that is pretty much where the sentence ends. I don't mind him as much as Florida, since Colin does have a purpose for being in the show other than being the toy, since he has a face we associate with the wharf, like Cranky at the docks. But other than that, he is a character that exists. In terms of characters that I think are worth talking about, there are only really 4 that come to mind. The first one is James, and I've already talked about this in the James video. Why am I saying that a lot? But I really like the dynamic between him and Hector. To keep it as brief as I can make it, this dynamic works given the status quo of the trucks on Sodor, and James' overall feelings towards them since in season 11, didn't really see Hector much at all and only saw him as a truck.
Bill and Ben shove slowly away with Hector. He does look troublesome, huffed James.
But when he gets in a sticky situation, he asks Hector for help, which makes him look at Hector in a different light, and I like that. Peter Sand came back this season with a lead role, which I also thought was pretty interesting. He is tethered once again to Proteus in this episode, and it feels weirdly fitting given that he was the one who didn't believe in the legend of Proteus, but is now going through a lot of effort into honoring Proteus himself, which feels very true to Peter Sam. I quite like it as well. Rosie got a spotlight episode this year, and while I don't like the episode at all, I do like how it showed us a bit of how Rosie ticks after having 2 seasons where we didn't really see much of her. She is a young, excitable engine that means well, but she can be pretty oblivious. But I feel like the oblivious part is because of the stupid events that happen in her episode, rather than it being a true personality. I also like that she paired up with Emily and not with Thomas, which feels like a lot more natural to me, but this is the last we will see of Rosie until far later into the show, like almost 10 seasons of content before she gets something again, which is baffling to me since they pushed her so hard in this era. Finally, we have to talk about Stanley, and I am shocked they did get an episode this year. Stanley was the new character around this time, thanks to the Great Discovery putting a spotlight on him. So it makes sense that the movie came out the same year as season 12 to give him some more screen time, but he didn't really get much this season. He was a secondary character and Gordon takes a shortcut and Thomas puts the brakes on, and nothing else. But even when the focus is on him, we don't really learn anything about him. If we could give Rosie an episode, then why couldn't we give Stanley an episode? I mean, people like Stanley, and they made a lot of toys of him, so this decision makes less sense the more I think about it. Overall, season 12 is the worst season of the show so far, for many reasons. The CGI, while impressive, is going to become more dated with time, the sets look awful, the episodes are starting to feel the same, and the characters are starting to feel like shells of their former selves. Knowing the behind the scenes of this season was eye-opening, and I hope for the best for the model crew. They deserve much better send-off. 2 out of 10. And that was all of the HiT era of the show. Overall, I would say that the HiT era was a pretty bad time for Thomas. If you watch this era in order, you're basically watching the show get worse and worse till the breaking point that was the Nitrogen era. Almost all of the problems of this era can be mentioned across all the seasons in this era, like the very childish writing that becomes more formulaic the further into the era we got. Character moments in the seasons that just missed the point of the entire character, especially Edward. But that doesn't mean that it was all bad. There were some glimmers of light in moments and episodes of this era. Season 9 had many good episodes. The characters didn't immediately become stupid and shells of their former selves, but I cannot deny that this era of the show is and will always be one of the many blunders of Thomas and Friends for how it had impacted the reputation of the show for years to come that can still be felt to this day. I may have nostalgia for this era of the show, but nostalgia doesn't automatically make it a good run of the show. And that was the HiT era of the show covered. But we are not done with this era whatsoever, because we got 2 specials in this era, and I have some things to talk about regarding them. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and as always, have a nice day.